Shalom from Beit and thank you for joining me in the study of Parashat Vayikra. We start a new book, Sefer Vayikra, the book of Vayikra, or as it's called, the book of Leviticus. And today I would like to speak to you about Vayikra el Moshe, really the opening statement of this parsha. Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem elav me'ohel Moed lemor. And he called to Moshe, and Hashem spoke to him in the tent of meeting, saying to him the following. Obviously, when we look at this verse and when we look at this pasuk, it seems to be that there is a question that just really cries out from the text itself. What does it mean, Vayikra el Moshe? What does it mean that Hashem called Moshe? We know that Hashem spoke to Moshe so many times. And it says, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, why do we need here a special calling, Vayikra el Moshe? And then Hashem spoke to him. What is the significance? What can we learn from it? And what does it mean to us regarding the entire book? So, the midrash, our sages in the midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, says the following. Vayikra el Moshe, and he called Moshe. ולאדם לא קרא, והלא כבר נאמר, ויקרא השם אלוקים אל האדם. So the midrash is wondering, what exactly is the uniqueness and the special idea here that Hashem called Moshe? What Hashem didn't call Adam when he spoke to him? It says, ויקרא השם אלוקים אל האדם. And Hashem, God, called Adam. So why do we need to have ויקרא אל משה? אלא, but rather, says the midrash, אין גנאי למלך לדבר עם אריסו. So, the midrash says, you know what? Maybe the idea of calling to someone, it means what? It means that Hashem does not feel, so to speak, that he's being diminished by speaking to a human being. So he already did it with Adam, and now he's doing it with Moshe. But really, there is not too much to be so excited. וידבר השם אליו, and Hashem spoke to him, to Moshe, ועם נוח לא דיבר, and what's the significance of speaking to Moshe? He also spoke with Noach. וידבר אלוקים אל נוח, Hashem already spoke to Noach too, אלא אין גנאי למלך לדבר עם נקדודו, but rather there is no disgrace for the king to speak to, if at the beginning it was ariso, which means was like almost like his employee, here it's someone who is a little bit more than his employee. And then the midrash continues to question this pasuk by saying, Vayikra el Moshe, and Hashem called Moshe, uleAvraham lo kara, what he didn't call Avraham. Vayikra malach Hashem el Avraham, and the angel of God called Avraham. Ela ein gnai lamelech ledaber im pundaki shelo. But rather there is no disgrace to Hashem to speak to his guest. As you can see, and we will talk about it in a few minutes, there is some kind of an evolution in the midrash that we will obviously need to address. We started with employee, Adam, Noach, who is a bit more, Avraham is Hashem's guest. And then the midrash gets to the point. Vayikra el Moshe velo ke'Avraham. When you compare Moshe and Avraham, there is a difference. באברהם כתיב, ויקרא מלאך השם אל אברהם. And the angel of God called Avraham. Says the midrash, המלאך קורא והדיבור מדבר. Meaning the calling to Avraham was from an angel, and then the voice of God came through. But the calling itself came from the angel. Bramhacha, however, here, in the case of Moshe, אמר רבי אבין, אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אני הוא הקורא ואני המדבר. I'm going to call Moshe and I'm going to speak to him. No angel, directly to Moshe. שנאמר, as it says in Isaiah, אני דיברתי, אף קראתיו, הביאותיו והצליח דרכו. I spoke to him, I called him, and I made his path successful. So now let's just try to digress a second and try to look at this midrash. Let's try to identify what exactly is the problem. The problem of the midrash is, why would the Torah mention that Moshe was called by God and Hashem spoke to him? There is nothing special with it. Hashem called other people like Adam, like Avraham. Hashem spoke to other biblical figures. Noah, Hashem spoke also to Yitzchak and to Yaakov. And what is the uniqueness? What is so special that Moshe was called? And now the midrash gives us an answer. It is true. Hashem called other biblical figures. Hashem spoke to other biblical figures. However, it was always in a different way than he called and spoke to Moshe. With Adam, with Noah, and even with Avraham, they were always addressed as employee or a guest, but never as an equal. And what do I mean equal? Obviously, Moshe is not equal to God. But Moshe had such a, I will call it such a condition, such a situation, that he and Hashem spoke like so-called friends. Panim el panim, face to face. במראה ולא בחידות. Clear view, not with covers, not with anything that is hidden. Moshe was basically dwelled on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and he spoke and communicated with God in a much higher level than anyone else. He received the Torah, which was the divine gift, and gave it to the people. And now, when we start a new book, when we start the service of the Mishkan, Hashem called Moshe, called him in, not because that was unique by itself. Hashem called and spoke to other people. And that's exactly the point of the midrash. The point of the midrash is that the opening statement of Sefer Vayikra, in a way, is to illustrate and to highlight and to emphasize the greatness of Moshe. So that's the point of the midrash. But now, we need to ask an additional question. Why here? Why specifically at this moment, at this junction, after the nation of Israel committed this terrible sin of the golden calf that we mentioned in Parashat Kitisa, and after we build the Mishkan, and now we are about to dedicate the Mishkan, why here? Why not before? Why not immediately after the golden calf? What's the point of mentioning here that Moshe is on such a high level? And this is the question that really all the commentators ask, and each one of them try to provide us with a different answer. So let's see the Yalkut Shimoni. Little bit of a later midrash, and our sages says the following. Vayikra el Moshe, and Hashem called Moshe. Maktiv lemala min ha'inyan, what is written before this opening statement? Parashat HaMishkan. Ka'asher tziva Hashem et Moshe. If you remember what we read last week, Vayakhel Pkudei, and you could see in Vayakhel Pkudei that everything that was built in the Mishkan, after there is a description, for example, and he made the table, and it will say, Ka'asher tziva Hashem et Moshe, exactly like Hashem commanded Moshe. And then he built the tabernacle, then he built the ark, then he built the menorah, everything there, it says, Ka'asher tziva Hashem et Moshe, like Hashem commanded Moshe. So, the midrash says, there is probably a connection between this idea of Moshe did exactly like he was commanded, and all the other builders did exactly like Hashem commanded Moshe, to the opening statement of Parashat Vayikra. So what is the connection? So the midrash says, you know what? I will try to portray to you a parable. What's the mashal, the parable? So mashal lemelech. So there is a parable to a king. שציווה את עבדו, ואמר לו בנה לי פלטין. So a king told his slave, his servant, I would like to ask you to build for me a palace. על כל דבר ודבר שהוא בונה, היה כותב עליו שמו של מלך. So this servant, the builder, he was also very smart. Everything he built, every wall, every window, every furniture that he created, he wrote on it the name of the king. היה בונה כתלים, he built walls, וכותב עליהם שמו של מלך. So he would write the king's name on the walls. היה מעמיד עמודים, so he established pillars for the building, כותב עליהם שמו של מלך. He would write the king's name on them. היה מקרה בקורות, so he will build the roof with beams, with wooden beams, כותב עליהם שמו של מלך. So he wrote on each beam the king's name. לימים, so after a while, נכנס המלך בתוך הפלטין. So the king came into the palace. ועל כל דבר ודבר שהיה מביט, and on everything that the king looked at, he looked at the walls, the windows, the beams, the roof, היה מוצא שמו. So he found his name. אמר המלך, so the king said, כל הכבוד הזה, this entire honor and glory, עשה לי עבדי. This servant did it for me. So just imagine, the king went into his new palace. Everywhere he looks, there is his name. So that's obviously something that it's very honorable. And so what will be the end result of this mashal? So our sage says, "Ve'ani bifnim, ve'hu mibachutz." So the king says to himself, it's not nice. My servant did so much for me. He honored me. My name is everywhere. It's not nice that I am in the palace and my servant, the builder, is outside. So what should I do? קראו לו שייכנס לפנים. So the king himself called the servant, the builder, and told him, come in, come to the palace that you built for me. So that's the mashal, that's the parable. What's the nimshal? What's the lesson from it? כך, בשעה שאמר הקדוש ברוך הוא למשה, עשה לי משכן. So the same way that when Hashem told Moshe, his servant, to build for him a mishkan, על כל דבר ודבר שהיה עושה, on everything that he did, היה כותב עליו כאשר ציווה השם את משה. Not literally, but figuratively, which means everything that Moshe did, he did in such a meticulous way, it was like he wrote God's name on everything he built in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, כל הכבוד הזה עשה לי משה ואני מבפנים והוא מבחוץ? This entire honor that Moshe did for me, I'm going to be inside the tabernacle, inside the Mishkan, and Moshe will stand outside? קרא שייכנס לפנים. So Hashem called Moshe, come in please, come to the palace. לכך נאמר, ויקרא אל משה. This is why Hashem called Moshe. So now let's try to analyze what is the meaning of this midrash. When you look at the parable, when you look at the story basically illustrated not only faithfulness and trustworthiness, but more than that. The servant knew that he will do everything for the king. He wanted that every detail of that palace will show, will reflect his king's name, his king's content and meaning. When Hashem told Moshe to build the tabernacle, there were obviously very detailed plan of how to build it. According to our sages, there were even few things that Moshe, it was very difficult for him to comprehend how to build it, like the menorah, for example, and Hashem showed it to him. Now, everyone who has a little bit of a sense of art and aesthetics knows that even when you tell a builder what to do and you give him the plans, every artist, every builder, everyone who is creative, like to add something that has my name. You know, almost every painter, he can paint something beautiful, but he will sign his name. You want your own personal contribution, your own personal mark on what you created. But, like the servant in the parable, Moshe realized it's not about him. And it's not about any of the artists or the workmen and women that created the Mishkan. It's about God. It should reflect purely, clearly God's presence. That's the glory of the Mishkan. That's the glory of the tabernacle. Yes, we create it. We are the one to create it. We are the one to build it. We are the one to structure it. But it needs to reflect God and the divine presence. And therefore, everything, every little detail that it's in the Mishkan, it's ka'asher tziva Hashem et Moshe. It's exactly like what God commanded Moshe, not even with one little change. When Hashem, so to speak, came into the Mishkan, to his palace, in Kvod Hashem maleh et HaMishkan, and the divine presence fills up the entire Mishkan, the entire tabernacle, there is no place that there is anything else besides the divine presence. Hashem says, it's not nice for me to be here, and the main builder, Moshe Rabbeinu, is outside. He needs to come in. So take a look at in a way, the illogical lesson of the midrash. On one hand, the Mishkan has, when it's built, there is nothing human there. There is only divine presence. But then when Hashem fills up the Mishkan, he says, I want human beings to be back in the palace. He invites Moshe back. And that's the significance of Vayikra and Moshe. This is the reason why. Meaning, in a way, there is almost like a back and forth. In order for the divine presence to fill up the Mishkan, humans, people must live, but in order for the divine presence to dwell, we need people like Moshe. And that's the idea of the midrash. Vayikra el Moshe, and Hashem himself called Moshe not just as a reward for what he did, not only as some kind of an award for the fact that he wrote God's name on everything in the tabernacle, but in order to show that there is this complete harmony between the divine presence and the humans who built it. Rashi takes the question of why there was a need to call Moshe, and he says the following: לכל דיברות ולכל אמירות ולכל ציוויים קדמה קריאה לשון חיבה. He says every time that Hashem spoke to Moshe, every time that Hashem told Moshe something, every time that Hashem commanded Moshe, there was a calling. Hashem called Moshe, because that's a language of חיבה, of being liked and loved. לשון שמלאכי השרת משתמשים בו. This is the language that the ministering angels use. שנאמר, as it says, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, and they called each other. אבל לנביאי אומות העולם נגלה עליהן בלשון ארעי וטומאה, שנאמר, ויקר אלוהים אל בלעם. These two sentences are very important. Rashi says that Hashem also called other prophets that belong to the other nations. But with them, the language is different. It says Vayikar, Vav, Yud, Kuf, Resh, not Vayikra. The Aleph is missing. What is Vayikar? It's language of Mikre. It's like, happened to be that he needs to talk to them. Or even from the word keri, which is impurity. In a way, Rashi is telling us that Vayikra el Moshe signifies the idea that Hashem called Moshe with chiba, with likeness. He wanted to talk to him. He didn't need to talk to him. He was not, quote unquote, forced to talk to Moshe. He desired to talk to Moshe. But that's Rashi is a bit problematic because, okay, but why here? Why do I need to say it here that Moshe is different than Bilam, the magician? Obviously he's different. Why it is so important here to show that Moshe is distinguished from all the other prophets? Says Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, something with tremendous insight. He says, Vayikra el Moshe, and Hashem called Moshe, לפי שכתוב למעלה, because it says before, which means at the end of Parashat Pkudei that we read last week, לפי שכתוב למעלה בסוף הספר, ולא יכול משה לבוא אל אוהל מועד, וכך קראו הקדוש ברוך הוא מתוך אוהל מועד. Rashbam says to us, wait, go back to the last verse, to the last few verses in Parashat Pkudei. And there it says what? כבוד השם מלא את המשכן. The glory of God, the divine presence, fills up the entire Mishkan, and Moshe could not go in. So, just imagine, the leader of the Jewish people, who was able to go to Mount Sinai and to stay there for 40 days and 40 nights 3 times. The first one came back with the first tablets and then broke them, went back for another 40 days and 40 nights to beseech God for forgiveness, and then go up again to receive the second tablets. So for 120 days, he goes up to the mountain, speaks to God, brings the first tablets, then later on brings the second tablets, and now he cannot go in. So people would look at him, and they will look at other people, and they say to themselves, wait, Moshe is not that different than all of us. He cannot go in, I cannot go in, you cannot go in, he cannot go in, we are all the same. And perhaps next time when he's being called, maybe it just happened to be that he was called. Maybe it just happened to be that Hashem didn't find anyone else. So, he had to talk to someone, so he spoke to Moshe to tell him what to do. So he can tell us what to do. In order to avoid such a thought, now imagine, the Mishkan is filled with the divine presence. They would say that there is like a major cloud that fills up the entire tabernacle. No one can go in. Everyone is afraid. And then a sound comes from that cloud and says to Moshe, come in. Vayikra, full Vayikra, which means, in a way, Moshe is being re-chosen. And why is it? Because maybe Moshe complete his job. He took the Jewish people from Egypt. He took them through Yam Suf, split the sea, received the Torah, broke the tablets, gave them the new tablets, built the Mishkan. The divine presence fills the Mishkan. Maybe now, from now on, there's no need for Moshe. Maybe from now on, God will just take them and that's it, and Moshe can sit aside. Answer is, he will be used from time to time. Answer is no. Moshe did not finish his job. There is still work to do. He needs to lead the Jewish people through the desert and bring them to the land of Israel. But in a way, because we reached a point that can be perceived as the end of the story, Rashbam says, after Moshe was not able to come into the Mishkan, now it's time to what? To, in a way, choose him again. In front of everyone. No one else can come in, only Moshe. So now we understand what his grandfather said. Rashi, Vayikra el Moshe. At that junction, at that moment in history, Moshe had to be re-elected by God to show Am Yisrael that 2 things really, 2 messages. 1, the divine presence dwells in something that you all build. All of you. At the same time, it's not about just being all of you. Your leader will continue to lead, Moshe. So this is the uniqueness, according to the Rashbam and Rashi, in the special calling that was the opening statement, really, of our parsha. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, 19th century in Germany, says the following, כך לימדנו הכתוב, that's what the verse, the narrative teaches us. שדיבר השם אל משה היה דיבור אל משה. שדבר השם אל משה, when Hashem spoke to Moshe, it was דיבור אל משה, it was to him. וכך הוציא מדעת המגלים פנים ומסלפים, and by saying that, he's basically rebuking the other people who think that כאילו התגלות השם אל משה היא התגלות מתוך ליבו של משה. Some people, some commentators, not all Jews, but some of them were Jewish people that basically thought that the revelations to Moshe came from his heart. It was not really a conversation between him and God. כאילו הוא דומה לאקסטזה של קוסמים ומנחשים. Some people thought that Moshe's prophecy was like ecstasy, or some kind of magic, or like he started dreaming or wandering. או אין היא אל התפעלות של רוח האדם המתרחשת בלב האדם, or maybe he was overly excited. He says no, לא כך, אלא כאשר ידבר איש אל רעהו. Moshe's prophecy was not in a dream. Moshe's prophecy was not an ecstasy. Moshe's prophecy was not something that he got excited. But rather, כאשר ידבר איש אל רעהו, like we speak to each other. כשם שהדבר הנאמר מאדם לאדם יוצא רק מלב המדבר, ואין הוא יליד רוחו של השומע. כי לא בקרב השומע נולד הדבר הנשמע, ולא הוא שתרם דבר ליצירתו. When we speak to each other, it's not from your heart, I speak, I create the language. I create the words, the sentences, and it comes to you. כך היה דבר השם אל משה. רק דיבור של השם בלבד. דבר השם was God speaking to Moshe, not his spirit, not in a dream, not in an illusion. It's God's speech. לא מלב משה יצא הדבר. It's not coming something that comes from Moshe's heart. אלא מן החוץ הוא הגיע אליו, but rather it came externally to Moshe. Hashem speaks externally, and then Moshe receives it. הוא קראו והוציאו והפסיקו מהגיגיו למען יפנה את ליבו להקשיב לדבר השם. Hashem calls Moshe and says, come. I don't want you to be sleepy. I don't want you to be dreamy. I don't want you to dream. I want you to be awake when I speak to you. קריאה זו הקודמת לדיבור סותרת את המחשבה על תהליך כלשהו, שהתרחב בלב משה עובר לדיבור. מציינת את השם לבדו כמדבר. It signifies that Hashem is the only one who speaks to Moshe, ואת משה כשומע בלבד. And Moshe is the recipient. He is the one who listens to Hashem's speech. משה לא הביא לידי כך שהשם מדבר עליו. אף הוא לא שיער מראש מה ידבר השם עמו. Moshe did not know what Hashem will speak to him. He didn't know when Hashem will speak to him. כי הדיבור הגיע אליו כמאורע היסטורי גמור. But rather the speech, Hashem's calling, came to him as an event that he did not know before. Now, why is that so important? Leave alone that Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch lived in Germany in the 19th century and obviously had to debate biblical criticism and other opinions regarding Moshe's prophecy. But that's the historical side. Let's talk about the content of his commentary. And basically, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch wanted to re-emphasize the idea that Moshe's prophecy is unique, is special, unlike any other prophets, but not only that. It's the idea that Hashem spoke to Moshe and Moshe listens. And when it says, כאשר ציווה השם את משה, we, the people who believe in the Torah, we believe that Moshe did exactly, without changing anything from what Hashem said. Because without it, the authenticity of the Torah will obviously be jeopardized. We need to believe that whatever Hashem told Moshe, Moshe did and implemented in the Torah. And that's the importance of Vayikra el Moshe vayedaber Hashem elav. That everything that Moshe said, everything that Moshe created in the past and will ask for you in the future, you need to know that it's exactly what Hashem told him. The Rebbe Milubavitch focused on something else. If you open up the Torah, you will see that Vayikra, you can see it also in the Chumashim, the last letter, the Aleph, is little, is small. Why is that? So the Rebbe Milubavitch says the following. He called to Moses. The Aleph, the letter Aleph in Vayikra, of the word for he called, which is Vayikra, the first word in the book of Leviticus, is written smaller than usual, alluding to Moses' humility even in the face of his own greatness, and his selection by God for his exalted role in human history. So the Aleph is small to show Moshe's humility. His humility was not self-delusional, but the result of simple reasoning. I cannot take any credit for any of my gifts or accomplishments, he thought, since they are all God-given. Indeed, were another person to have been given my potentials, he would have accomplished more and climbed greater heights than I have, says Moshe. He understood that true humility does not mean denigrating oneself, but seeing the virtue in others. That itself has tremendous insight. Humility does not mean to be, as we say in Yiddish, a schmate, someone who, oh, I'm not smart, no, I'm not great, really I didn't accomplish anything. That's not the idea of humility, that's fake humility. Humility is to understand that I have potential, I have tools, I have potential, I have capabilities, I can accomplish a lot. But you know what? If someone else will have my same potential, he probably will do more, which means I need to work harder. I need to be thankful to God, to everything He gave me. But I know that I can maximize my potential even more than I do now. That's true humility. It's to recognize your capabilities and to know that I have work to do. Moreover, if we remember the small aleph, we too will merit to be called by God. And that's a lesson to each one of us. And His revelation will provide us with the strength to answer God's call. God is calling each one of us. But we need to be humble enough to listen to it. We need to be humble enough to know that He is calling us. And also we need to be humble enough to know that when God calls us, He calls us for a reason. This is the true essence of the sacrifice whose laws are introduced by the lesson of small aleph. This is the idea of korban, is to give something of yourself, is to understand who you are and the gifts that God gave you, and to continue to work hard to accomplish more. So now, Hashem called Moshe. And this little calling revealed to us so much depth. The understanding that there is some kind of a harmony between the divine presence and human deeds. To understand the idea that Moshe had to be re-elected in a way. And to understand that there is a calling not only to Moshe, but to each one of us, to enter the tent of meeting, to do something for Am Yisrael, for the Jewish people, to do something for the state of Israel, to do something for another Jew, to do something for another person, to understand the calling, to hear the calling, to realize who we are and what we can be. Thank you.